in session. And if everybody would stand for the pledge and remain standing for invocation. We'll give that invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You want to do it?
Yeah. Most gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for the many blessings that you give us every day. And we just ask that the decisions that we make today be pleasing in your sight and will please all those people concerned. Of these things we ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay. So first order of business will be questions and comments from citizens, and this will not pertain specifically to the agenda items that we have. If anybody just wants to make a comment, ask a question, not pertaining to the agenda items this time. Okay, I don't see any, so we'll move on. We got to take a motion to approve the minutes
So
of the May
moved.
20th.
I make a motion.
Second. Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Next item will be the 1512 Hector. And before I do that, I need to swear in all the applicants and anybody that wants to make comment on any of the agenda items. So if you'll stand and raise your right hand. Do those who plan to give testimony before this board affirm that such testimony will be the truth? If so, say I do. I do. You may be seated. Okay. 1512 Hector, and you want to bring us up to date about what you got?
Yes, sir. So, Mr. Sharp would like to come up to the microphone. So what we have here is Mr. Sharp wants to put a carport in the front portion of his property.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a 23 by 20, is that correct, Mr. Sharp?
Yeah, but that's up to negotiation too, yeah.
So that's what we have on our plans, is a 23 by 20 what he submitted. So we went out and we measured the property, and by our measurements, the carport would come up to 1 foot off of the right-of-way in the front of the property there.
Off of what? Off of Hector or?
This on Hector Street.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Oh, the right of way.
Right-of-way.
I misunderstood you, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. So it's gonna come 1 foot off that property, off the right-of-way. And I read in a couple of different areas where it's gonna be 2 feet or 3 feet off the north side neighboring property line. It's gotta be at least 3.
Right.
So, it's a pretty
Well, then
big
if it's coming that close to the right of way, is that going to cover the sidewalk?
It comes just off of the sidewalk. Yeah,
On his side?
yeah, yeah,
So it'd be right next to the sidewalk?
pretty close.
Okay.
And, let's see. So it's gonna be 23 by 20, so that gives them a little bit off the sidewalk. I know that we kind of looked at it as a safety standpoint, you know, sticking out there kind of far. In his notes, he did say that it would be open where people could see through. But I think my concern would be cars parked there, and when they're parked there, that you are unable to see through it.
Right,
It is a
right.
big structure, and driving around that area, we don't see anything in the front yards like that. So there really is nothing comparable to that structure he wants to put out. After visiting with Larry Bird, and we talked a little bit about this today, our recommendation at this time would be that it not be built in that setback, front yard setback.
Okay. So is this the picture of what you were
That would
considering
be,
building?
we might say an artist rendering of approximately what it would look like in terms of just the layout of it.
Okay.
And, you know, the way that, you know, The siding is done on the front, and also the composition shingles. There, you see the picture lower right?
Yeah.
Black composition shingles, and it would have 4 posts. It would look approximately like that. And he is correct, yes, sir. My driveway currently is 2 feet away from the property line on the north side. And so it would go out there, although I could bring it in. I mean, I could cut into the driveway, notch it
So are
out.
you gonna cover both driveways?
Yeah, so I bought the house in 1993, and I have a 2-car pad there in front. I'd like to cover that
I drove
pad.
by and looked at it, and that's most
Yeah,
what
I'd like to cover that
I was
existing
wondering.
pad. And I do have it, presently, I do have, wrote in the plan to have it come out almost to the sidewalk. And the more I looked at it, and I saw some other carports around town, like, the one 1106 Primrose, not far from my house at all. It comes out probably about 19 or 20 feet, so I would certainly be more than amiable about making it not come as close to the street, not come as close to the curb and the right of way, as long as I could have my vehicles covered. Yeah.
So a 20 by 20 versus a 20 by 23,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
would that even require?
It's still
It's
required
still
one.
into the,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
as you'll notice, we line the houses up down that street on both sides, that there's nothing,
Yeah.
toward the front that's wide.
Well, just for the board's information, I'm not even sure y'all were on the board at the time, but there has been a request in that neighborhood, not necessarily on that street, that we denied because of the sidewalk issue. So there's a lot of kids walking up and down through there, and
But if
So
it's
we have-
not gonna cover the sidewalk,
yeah, but it still impedes a little view, and it forces, this is my opinion, it'll force the kids to, maybe move away, I'm not sure.
If I may speak to that, if I did bring it back 20 by 20, it would be approximately 3 to 4 feet away from the sidewalk.
Okay.
Which is roughly the same as the one on Primrose Street. I drove by and looked at it, so it'd be really similar to that one on Primrose.
Is the one you're referring to on Primrose down around the corner down there in the bottom?
Yeah, Primrose and Wilson, or Evergreen, Primrose and Evergreen roughly. Yeah, about 3/4 of the way down the street there.
We have one protest. Did you want to speak to that?
Mr. Williams.
My name is Borger Williams, and I live down on the corner. I do consider Les a very good friend, and I hope that my protest doesn't change that friendship any. I would not like to see that put on our street. The one he's referring to on Primrose, I would be interested to know when that was built and what the regulation was. I've seen the one on Primrose. It's very nicely built and built into the shape of the house and everything. And one of my concerns that I put on the list of protest was that this would open the door to anybody else, myself included. My 2 neighbors across the street both have closed in their garages, and they might decide the same thing, that we want one. And we'll start seeing them pop up and down the street if that, if they so desire. Nearly all that block only has single-car garages. And many, well, I won't say many of them, several of them have been in the whole neighborhood of Nightcrest have been closed in for another room to the house. And personally, I would not want it next door to my house. And for a few years, I had a big evergreen bush on the corner, and I'm sure everybody on the block, when they pulled up there, said, either in their own mind or to whoever's in the car with them, I wish that guy had cut that bush down so I can see around the corner. Well, I didn't have anyone protest that bush, but I'm sure they thought it a lot of times, because when I back out to my driveway, I have to get up past it, or had to see down Tristram Street. That bush has been removed now for about 4 years, and I like it a lot better, and I'm sure every person on the street likes it better. But I would like to see our street remain as aesthetic as it is, with no properties jutting out on the front, no building jutting out on the front of the streets. There's, as you mentioned, driving around the area, in Nightcrest itself, on those streets, there is not another one that I could find anywhere. I wished I'd asked a question earlier about those streets, but I'll do that later. But,
Well, feel free to ask your question.
oh,
It's-
well,
It's time right now.
This concerns the naming of the streets?
The naming of the streets?
Yes.
Oh, okay, well, that doesn't come
That's
under
why I
our
say I
purview.
don't,
Yeah,
I'll talk about that.
that's not in our purview, but thank you. Appreciate it.
I thought we granted one over that area somewhere
No,
that had to be tied to the house. Maybe that was,
I think it was on,
Santa Fe or Baylor over in.
yeah,
Yeah, and he ended up moving it back in line with the house a little bit. So
yeah.
that one doesn't stick out. And I'm not sure about the one he's referring to on Primrose, so I don't know if that's been done before codes were in place or when it was, you know.
Yeah, it may not be the one I'm thinking about. One I'm thinking about is down below that park
Oh, yeah.
that we did allow, but it was a house that stood alone over there kind of by itself
Yeah, next to that.
and not on the street like we're looking at now. But I have concerns with the precedent that we may set, and
I just want to assure my neighbor that, whom I love and respect dearly, that would not be any, I wouldn't be upset about it at all, and I want y'all to know that I wouldn't, I'll have to go to Plan B, something like that. All I would say, I appreciate Mr. Williams' concern. Our houses were built in the early 1960s when most American families only had maybe one car.
right.
And now, most families have three. Quite a few cars parked on our street. And I'm not so, I understand the aesthetics of it, but I'm not so sure it would be a bad development to have several carports built on our street, because it might add to the resale values of our homes. If they were built nicely, if they look good, added to the aesthetics of the house and the street, it might actually add to the resale value of the home, and might be good for the neighborhood long-term to be having some structures like this built. Now, that's just purely speculative, I understand, but that was a thought that I had. When I thought about building this, I thought it might add to the resale value of my home.
How difficult would it be to have this carport be a part of your house?
Oh, I don't, no, I do plan on building it into the house, just like the one that's on Primrose, so it'll be,
It won't be freestanding?
no, ma'am. I plan on.
Because that's,
I'm planning on
these
attaching.
pictures are freestanding.
Oh, yes, ma'am, and I'm sorry, I don't know if you received that little scale drawing there or not, but.
Can't see anything.
Oh, sorry.
Bunch of black lines.
Sorry, well, it's done in pencil. But yeah, it says on there that I plan on attaching to the house. Yes, ma'am. So, plan on doing that. Yeah.
So it'll blend in with the house?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Anybody got any other questions?
Well, we did this, we allowed this for a couple of those places over on, out in the new Fair Lanes, West Ocala, and didn't we allow them to do that as long as it was a part of the house?
Yeah, but I think the driveways over there are quite considerably longer. This one's is pretty short driveways over there. Did you get a chance to go by and look?
I did not go by.
Yeah, they're really short driveways. And, I think there's a good point being made that, yeah, it's open. However, when vehicles are there, it's not open. And being that close to the school, and foot traffic in the area, and, I personally don't want to go down that road of starting a precedence that we can't put an end to be honest with you.
Well, I think if we're gonna,
I mean, there are specific situations and,
you know, you drive down those streets and there's cars parked everywhere.
Yeah.
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 So I don't know why we're concerned about a sidewalk and where you can see and all that stuff.
Because the cars on the sidewalk are just as dangerous as, more dangerous than if they were parked
Well-
in the driveway, I would
You
think.
go by there after school and the whole street might be blocked with cars, waiting on kids to get to them from the school.
Yeah.
Have you thought about what your plan B might, that might entail?
I'd have to go back and see you again. I'd have to build in the backyard.
And then
But
you'd have to
again,
have,
but again, because the garage has been filled in, should I sit? Or
Yeah.
am I okay here?
No, you need to be fine.
sorry,
I should have stayed there, okay. So when I bought the house, again, my garage was filled in, and then they had built a pretty large shed in the back. And so, in order for me to build a garage in my backyard, which would, you know, something this size would take almost all my backyard with that shed and this.
Less to mow.
Yeah.
you can only have
That's right.
50% of the,
But, you know, hopefully
So you'd
grandkids
have
get to
to
come
tear
run
the
around the
shed
yard
down
someday.
and consider it.
But with that said, I'll have to come back to you again, maybe to get a variance about perhaps building, you know, a carport in my backyard, but I'd probably have to go to my other neighbor, be a little bit closer to my other neighbor than is allowed by code, perhaps,
So,
to
Mr.
try to
Sharp,
fit
was
something like
your-
that back there.
Was the garage already converted to living quarters before you lived there, or did you
Yes, sir.
convert?
Yes, sir, it was, yeah. The house is, you know, other than some minor remodeling, is exactly like I bought it in 1993. Yes, sir. Yeah.
I tend to agree that there could be a possibility of, because of the way the house was built, that there's a little bit of value that could be increased. I don't know, you know, you can't quantify that necessarily. And I agree that cars parked on the street is definitely a problem. I don't want to set the precedent either, to be honest, and I think we've had that discussion before, but with what he's offering in terms of the quality of the build, I mean, I fall right in the middle right now. I mean, I think there's both sides.
Kelly, where's my, rules for determining whether or not,
Your hardship.
yeah.
One
I
thing,
don't,
It's on the front, the back page of the application.
one thing I think that we consider too when going out and inspecting these is this structure gonna be a hindrance to, like our firefighters when they come to fight a fire? Is that gonna be in the way of them saving a structure, you know, having to get around a structure in the front? That's one of the things that we consider when we're looking at property like this.
Where is that? What is right here on the? Oh, approval march.
where is it?
I mean, that's,
Yeah. Yeah, that's on our ballot. Okay, I'm just gonna read this just to remind the board what guidelines we are supposed to be following. And an unusual situation on the part of an individual property owner that will not permit the full utilization of the property that is given to others within the community. A hardship exists only when it is not self-created or when it is not economic in nature. In other words, a true hardship exists only when the literal interpretation of the requirements of the ordinance would place an individual in an unusual circumstances and would deny the right to use the property for any purpose or to create an unnecessary burden unless relief is granted. So those are the hardship guidelines that, yeah, I got one here, Kathy. It was on the ballot. I didn't realize that. And there's a couple other things. Applicant must prove hardship. Variance will not be granted for a self-inflicted hardship or condition. Prove unique conditions to the property that shows there is no other alternative to comply with existing zoning ordinance. and has the person shown they cannot comply with the ordinance and still utilize the property in the same way as others in that zoning district. So I just want to remind the board to consider that instead of what it's going to look like and some of the other things that we discussed. Those are the code guidelines that we're required to follow.
Well, I would say if there's a plan B in this situation, I know that you can only use 50% of your backyard with the current shop or current thing in place, that might not work, but I tend to think that we shouldn't set the precedent at this point until Mr. Sharp has looked at all the opportunities that he has, including the backyard.
And just to speak to that, as the guidelines state, within variance. So if I have to go to Plan B, I will still have to come back again and
Right.
and try to get another variance.
Right.
It would be a different one.
And that's okay, it gives us an opportunity to look at an alternative, if you will.
And per what you asked a moment ago, I did inherit the house as it is. And I can make a lot of modifications to the house. In my mind, this would be the first and the best and the easiest and the most advantageous. So that's why I wanted to come and bring this first. There may be some others, but I really do feel like this would be first and best. I truly do. So that's the only reason I bring it to you. Yeah, but if y'all feel differently, I understand. Because you have other considerations to take in mind, and I fully agree with that, so.
Yeah, since we don't have homeowners, organizations, or whatever it is, we have to follow ordinances in the city, so.
And I don't know if are there deeds set up in that area?
Are there deed restrictions?
Deed restrictions?
Deed restrictions, yeah.
'Cause we
I'm sorry.
didn't, I'll be honest, we didn't look at deed restrictions before this.
You didn't?
Deed restrictions may even
Yeah,
prevent him from even putting it
Right.
there. And that may be what we don't see over there, so.
well, I don't have any other questions. Y'all have any other questions for Mr. Sharp?
I think you've made a good case. I think you've
Sure.
brought good
Glad to
information.
answer any questions you might have.
Okay.
Glad to. Okay.
If there's no other questions, then I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion to not grant the variance setback for 1512 hectare.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? If there's no further discussion?
Fine.
If I could, Mr. Sharp, when you start coming with that Plan B, Plan C, whatever we get to,
You're opposed?
if you would just get a hold of us and set up a meeting between myself, Larry, and Shelby, we'll all sit down and see if we can come up with some type of solution over there to help you out.
Okay, I appreciate that.
But in the meantime, you might check into those deed restrictions and see what you do have to work with at this time.
Yes, sir.
'Cause it
And
may be
how
something that's
will
gonna-
how will I access that information?
I've never had to do that, so I'm thinking probably you'd have to go to the county and just see what's on file over there.
Okay.
Probably Pioneer Lawyers.
Yeah,
I'm
Pioneer Lawyers.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Pioneer
and
Lawyers.
stuff.
Oh, is that right? Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
It would be on the deed itself,
Yeah.
Is that right?
the deed of your house, yes.
Okay, okay, will do. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
sir.
What happens to the unanimous vote?
No.
No.
No, you said no.
Yep. We had 3 in favor and 1 opposed. Okay, next item on the agenda will be the 125 West Grand. Is there anybody here to speak to that? If you'd step up to the microphone, and if anybody has any questions for you, they'll.
Okay, so I guess Mr. Anderson's wanting to put a carport on the vacant lot there off of Grand, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so how long have you owned this property?
I do not own the property.
Okay.
I bought a property about a month ago at 208 West Wilson. And the property that we're speaking of, there's an alley that runs directly behind all those townhomes on West Wilson.
Yes, sir.
So the property that we're speaking of is a vacant lot that is kind of adjacent to my garage that goes along that alley. When I bought my property on West Grand, I originally thought of building a carport along the back of my driveway, but it's a pretty tight area back there. So then I happened to notice this empty lot that's basically right across the alley from me, and thought, well, that might be a better solution. So I started looking into that lot, and what I found out was, I don't know for sure how long the lot has been vacant. At one point in time, there was obviously a home on the lot, and my understanding is that the city of Borger demolished that home.
Yes, sir.
I don't know how many years ago.
It's probably been about five.
Five,
years.
okay. And that the lot has been vacant since. My understanding that one of the neighbors who lives not adjacent to it, but 2 or 3 houses down, has kind of been helping maintain the property as far as keeping it mowed so that the weeds and so forth are not a problem. Anyway, so when I noticed this property, I thought that might be my solution, and started trying to find out who owned the property. That was quite an undertaking. It took me about 3 weeks. I ended up talking to a real estate company in California. They, from what I understood, had bought the property somehow, some way, maybe through an online auction. I'm not sure. They had owned it for a little while. They had ended up selling it online to some gentleman who lived in some little town outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. I doubt he's ever even seen the property. Don't know what he paid for it. My guess would be a fraction. Anyway, through quite a process, I found out he was the owner. Ended up being able to find out his contact information, contacted him, told him that I was interested in the property. He said he didn't really have a use for it, wanted to know if there was still a satellite tower on it. And I said, I don't think there's ever been a satellite tower on this property. He knows nothing about the property. So basically, of course, I didn't realize that what I intended for the use of the property was going to be an issue. So he and I basically agreed upon a price, and he had never even had the property transferred into his name. It was still in the name of this real estate company out of California. So he began the process of getting the property transferred into his name so that I could purchase it from him. In the meantime, I thought, or maybe somebody advised me, I don't remember, but I thought I better make sure that what I want to do with the property is okay. And that was when I first contacted the city about saying, it's a vacant lot, it's between 2 houses, it's adjacent to my property. What I would like to do at current time, it's a long, kind of a narrow lot. I don't know if any of you have driven by to see it, but it's a long, narrow lot. And what I would like to do with the property at current time is build a carport on the back of it, utilize the back of the property, because basically I have a 3/4 ton truck that won't fit in my garage, and I'd like to have a place to park it. At some point in time, I could see, I have a brother who might eventually end up putting I'm told we have a stipulation about the size of tiny homes, but he's 10 years older than I am, and I might eventually have a tiny home in the front of the property in which he could reside. It would be handy for me to help him. So that's basically the story.
So do you live on across the alley south?
On Wilson.
Yeah.
In the townhome?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, behind the townhomes, there's a whole alley that runs behind all of those. And this lot, my garage is on this side of the alley, this lot is on the other side of the alley, not directly behind my house, but kind of adjacent. I would
Was
say
there a big
maybe.
RV carport sitting there on? your property, or?
That is a property down about 3 houses down from me.
Okay, so you're not directly behind the lot
No.
then? Copy.
No, Jerry
Okay.
Collins owns the property you're speaking of, and
Okay.
that RV carport, I think, has been there for 20 years or more.
Okay,
But the property that I'm speaking of is actually directly behind his RV carport.
right, right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I
I don't think I truly understood. So you are or you're not the owner of this
I
property?
am not the owner of the property because I was ready to buy the property from the man when I came to the city and found out it could be a problem to even use the property for what I wanted it for. So I got back with him and I said, I'm gonna have to go before the city, I'm gonna have to go through a variance board. And unfortunately, because of one issue after another, y'all didn't meet last time.
Right.
So it's been about a 2-month process. And I just told him, I said, I don't want to buy this property unless I can actually use it for what I want to use it for. So I've got to wait until I can meet with the variance board to find out if they will approve what I want to use it for.
Well, I appreciate your.
If they do, then I want it. If they don't, I have no use for it.
I appreciate your situation and, you know, thinking that through, but I'm not sure we can give a variance to somebody that don't own the property.
Well, I've made that quite clear from the first day that I ever walked in this building to
Yeah.
discuss this.
Well, I thought you had bought the lot.
No.
You have a
Legally,
purchase
we
agreement
can't
and
give a
everything.
variance on a property because this is a kind of a quasi-legal board. And I don't believe, unless there is an exception somewhere, that we can, you know, give a variance on property that you don't actually own.
So I would have to buy the property and then apply for a variance. And then
Right.
if you did not prove it, I'd have no use for the property.
I understand, I appreciate your situation. you
Well,
know,
I think
but
the frustrating
hope you
part
can
for me at this
appreciate ours
point is that, you know, this has been a long, long process.
Right.
I've worked on this for over 2 months now. And I've made it very clear from the very beginning that I don't own the property. I've made
Well, I
that
don't
clear
know
from the very
who
beginning.
allowed you to make an application for a variance
I
with
feel,
that.
because my understanding was that he was gonna go ahead and buy the property.
Okay,
That's what I thought.
yeah. But, like I said, unfortunately, we can't give you know, there's not a whole lot we can say right now. What would the city recommend speculatively?
I would recommend either that property owner come in and apply for that variance himself,
Right,
or this gentleman purchase the property outright.
right.
Now, are you still dealing with Skyline Realty?
No, they actually sold the property to this gentleman that lives somewhere out of Las Vegas.
Has anybody been paying taxes on it? Did you
No,
check
sir.
the?
No taxes paid on it in the last several years. The neighbors have been having to maintain the property. You know,
So
I
the
think
tax
it's-
office here didn't have a actual owner of record then?
No,
They sold that with the
they
tax
still show
deed.
the owner as the Skyline Properties, which
Yeah.
in all actuality, from my understanding, they still are the actual legal owners until I started pursuing buying the property. And then the guy decided that the only way he could sell the property was to actually get it transferred over in his name.
Right, right.
So he has done that now. My understanding is he's done that, so that I could buy it from him. But like I said, I have no use for the property if.
So is he
if-
gonna catch the taxes up on it?
You know, the taxes on it are so minimal that it's not even an issue.
If
They're
we
only
had,
like
if-
$60 a year or something.
if he had a purchase agreement, putting it under contract, would that allow us to make a ruling on a variance and come back to it? Or does he have to have it?
No, I don't think so, because
So he
that
can
could
get out
go
of the-
south and.
Right, because he could get out of the contract, that's
Right.
why I was talking, okay.
Right. Where's
So
the
you
city
said
attorney?
you do have some room on your actual property?
I have a driveway, you know, back behind my garage, but that alley is so tight that I doubt you'd ever even approve that.
There's one there, but there's one there. But I think, is it the RV one that you're talking about?
Yeah,
It's there, it's been there for 30 years.
yeah.
Yeah, because I drove behind, yeah, it's tight.
And
I was under the assumption that you lived right there, because you were across the alley is what our information said, so
Yeah.
I thought, well, if he lives right there, that's, a pretty handy deal, but,
I live 20 footsteps away from the property,
Yeah,
at
that's
most.
Yeah, I don't think we can,
Well, it was my understanding that you were gonna go ahead and purchase the lot after we talked on the phone that night, but I called you late. I thought you were gonna have already bought the lot.
Well, like I said, I was so frustrated at that point in dealing with this situation that I didn't really know what I was gonna do. And then I decided it'd be really crazy for me to spend that much money on a vacant lot that I will not even be able to use for the purposes that I wanted it, if a variance were not approved for it.
well, if the apartment or house that you were talking about putting on there is an important thing to you, then it would, I guess.
That's a someday maybe thing.
Yeah.
The carport is the only absolute guarantee thing. A place to put a house for my older brother at some point in time is a plus.
Yeah.
But that's not the reason for the purchase of the property.
can we talk about, or are we allowed to say what we've done in the past with that situation?
As far as,
Putting a carport on a vacant lot?
sure.
Because we haven't, since I've been on the board, we haven't allowed that. So I don't know why
We have allowed a few people to put storage buildings on, but
that,
not
yeah,
carports.
4 walls, closed
Yeah.
in, correct.
Right.
That would be what we would want to see.
Yeah.
I know that there were letters sent out to some of my neighbors. Could I ask what the result of those was?
We did have,
There was only one dissenter.
yeah,
I would prefer not to say who that is, but there was one dissenter.
How many consenters?
I didn't count them. 3.
how many did you send out?
17 letters went out.
And you only got 4 back. It's typical Borger.
Sorry about the frustrations you're having, for sure. I've been through
I
this
appreciate what
process
you're trying to
before.
do, and I would probably try to do the same thing. But unfortunately, our hands are tied, and until you actually own the property, we can't grant a variance for a property that Skyline's not requiring, or whoever it is in Las Vegas is not asking for a variance.
So, may I ask this question? If I did own the property today, if it were in my name, what would be the ruling? Because the information is not going to change.
We could have different board members, so that could change the idea of it. I'll just throw that out there as the variance, but I, without it being 4 walls, are we allowed to speculate?
Like with any board, I mean, your chances are gonna be 50-50.
Yeah.
You know, like he
That's
was-
where it's gonna wind
Like he
up,
was
you know.
saying,
and-
you got some board members are missing, so today, if these 2 were gonna say yes and they're not here, and these 2 that show up gonna say no, I mean, you just can't tell until.
Well, I'll only conclude by saying this. You know, we're talking about a piece of property that is not having taxes paid on it. I'm a taxpayer, paid taxes all my life. It would have taxes paid on it.
Yeah, we're looking at it right
It
now.
would have taxes paid on it if I owned it.
It's $80 behind on
The
taxes
city of
right now.
Borger has not maintained it for many years.
Sure.
If we were not fortunate enough, from what I'm told, to have a neighbor in the neighborhood who has graciously mowed it and cared for it, it would be a grown-up mess that at some point in time, the city of Borger would have to take care of, I would think.
Well, that's the thing. Our code enforcement officers, when properties get to that stage, he sends letters out to these property owners. And when they live in Las Vegas, California, I know personally, because I did code enforcement for 8
So
years.
it ain't gonna happen.
Well, no, not necessarily. So we send those letters out, we file the charges, we get warrants for their arrest. And what the state of Texas tells us is that property has to be 48 inches or higher, and then we can go in without any notice and do it. But the problem is, when you do have the good neighbors that are taking care of it, then to us, it looks like, well, they must have came down and did something, you know? So it never gets to that point that we can step in, file the liens, and move forward with more legal charges or whatever. But I know sometimes doing the good deed comes back to, you know, honest. I know because I did it for my neighbors in my neighborhood. And they haven't taken care of their property for about 2 or 3 years. And I talked to him one day and he said, I wonder who's coming over. And I'm like, dude, you're looking at him, you know? And it sounds like that's where you guys are.
Well, I obviously understand where this has ended, so I will thank you for your time for listening to me.
Appreciate it.
And I will end by saying to the city of Borger, this has been one of the most frustrating experiences I've gone through in quite some time. I've been in business, I've managed huge retail stores, I've dealt with lots of people and lots of employees. And dealing with the city of Borger has been one of the most frustrating experiences I've had. And today only tops it off, because I've wasted more of my time coming before a board that's now telling me, we can't rule on this because you don't own the property, when I have made clear the fact that I didn't own the property from the very first day I walked into the office. Thank you.
I'll say this, the board has been very accommodating to people that want to improve vacant lots. And that's the most I can say about that. But we have been very accommodating for that as a whole. So if that helps you, I will say that.
All right. Thank you much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're going to take no action on that agenda item, and I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh,
Yes.
yes, sir. I'm sorry.
His question prompted, was I the only one that rejected variance on my street?
I
Out of
would
the ones that
prefer,
got, out of the ones that got returned, she said that was 17?
I said I'm 16, I think.
16 on your street, only a handful came back and you were the only one. There may have been others that felt that way that just didn't want to send the letters in, you know.
I'm really surprised, the guy next door to him on the south.
Well,
Wait here
In March, 3 of them said yes, and then when I sent out the letters, there were only 3 people who actually responded.
that's how you did not want it.
Yes, sir. I've talked to you on the phone, I'm Kathy, so you and I have had conversations.
We appreciate you coming in, sir.
yeah, thank you, sir.
And you had other questions about naming streets?
If you want to adjourn, I'll ask that.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second. Motion is second, all in favor?
Aye.
We're
Aye.
adjourned.
Okay.
You could probably
I'm
talk
sorry
with
about
Garrett
those.
Bradley,
I
our
didn't, I
city
wanted
manager.
to ask the questions, but I didn't know how
And
to
he
ask
could
them
probably help you with that.
in a way that wasn't
No, that's fine.